I've made previous videos before about how to improve your study habits as a self-taught software developer, and I'll throw that video up right here. I highly recommend watching that if you haven't, but what I've seen is that a lot of people will apply these habits, but they're still not totally getting a good study system down. And if you don't get a good study system down, you're gonna struggle long-term. And so what I want to talk about in this video is the biggest thing that I see people make mistakes on with their study system that if they don't quite fix will make it hard to do this long-term. And by the way, this problem or this worst habit that I've seen people do is something that I did for a while. So I'm not, I'm actually very familiar with this, but we're gonna go ahead and talk about that. Before we do, if you don't know who I am, I'm Andy Sterkwitz. I'm a self-taught software developer. I taught myself to code back in 2014. I landed my first job in 2015. And now this channel is dedicated to people who want to do the same thing. So I really cover some high-level stuff about how to become a software developer, how to learn better, how to get that first job so you can make that transition as well. So if you're interested in content like that, I can't recommend enough to hit the subscribe button below. Also make sure to hit that bell icon because you get notifications then anytime I put out a new video. So I think to really best understand what I'm about to get at here, we should really go back in a time machine back to 2014 when I was learning to code. Back then I actually didn't have great study habits. I never really figured that out. In high school I was a terrible student, and so when I was 27 or 28 years old, whenever this was, I still was doing a lot of bad things. Kind of give you a picture of where I was at with my life. I was working full-time as a car salesman. My weekends were spent studying. After work, I would spend studying as well. So I was pushing it to the limit. I was highly motivated to do this, but I was finding that I was having a lot of issues. I feel like I was sort of like carrying, a sack of bricks behind me everywhere I was going because it just felt like things were difficult, like things weren't smooth. And that's something that is different from how I am now. Like I feel like the study process is a lot smoother, but the point is that it felt very difficult. It felt like I was kind of grinding my teeth all the time. And a couple problems that I had. Number one, I felt guilty a lot. Like I kind of had this feeling of guilt all the time. Like I wasn't really doing enough. I also felt like I wasn't really enjoying the process. I felt like I resented the process of studying a lot. I felt like I was drained of energy a lot, meaning I could kind of drag myself around to work and then back to studying, but I didn't feel like this vibrancy, or I didn't feel like I had a lot of energy at the time. And then overall, I felt like my progress was just not going as fast as I wanted to in the early days, like I'd say the first month of studying. And after a while, I started to really critically look at what I was doing. And I noticed that there was one thing kept coming up. It was really this lack of clear boundaries between work and play. For example, when I would kind of get bored with studying, I'd be in a long study session. I told myself I had to study for like 3 or 4 hours straight without breaking. Well, when I'd be in one of those study sessions, I would open up the computer and start playing a movie or something. Or maybe I was coding and I'd start playing a movie in the background, or I'd play a podcast or something because I thought to myself, hey, I need to relax a little bit. And I would do things as well as like, okay, a friend wanted to hang out, but I wanted to study. So I was like, what do I do here? So I would just invite them over and tell them like, look, I'm going to study while we watch this movie. So I would study with my laptop open. We'd be watching a movie and I'd be going back and forth between the two activities. But this really was the root of my problems, meaning that I was not really having clear rules about what it meant to work and then what it meant to have free time, and like what was the threshold for myself that I could feel good about. If I studied for 5 hours a day, was that enough? Was 1 hour enough? Like what was it? I didn't have these rules in my head. And so that's really the message that I want to send to a lot of you guys today, is that if you find that you're struggling a lot with just the motivational side of things, so if you feel like you're feeling guilty all the time, like you're not doing enough, or if you feel like you just don't enjoy this, you enjoy coding, but you don't enjoy the process of the learning and sitting down every day and figuring out how to do it every day, and maybe you just don't feel like you're making progress, it could stem from a lack of boundaries. So what does it mean to have boundaries between work and your free time? So what I basically look at in my head is this. When I'm sitting down to study, I have specific rules. So for example, when I study, I either study for 25 minutes at a time with a 5-minute break, or I study for 45 minutes at a time with a 15-minute break. Meaning there is not a single time where I sit down to study or do work where there's not a timer going that doesn't tell me when to stop. The reason that I do this is because I know how important it is to get away from the work, meaning that my brain is not a machine. It is more like a muscle that needs rest before it can do intense work. So I like short, brief periods of intense work followed by breaks, right? And I stick to that, I'd say 90 to 95% of the time. And when I don't follow that, I get into trouble. Another thing is that when I'm working, right? So in other words, no distractions. period. I don't have my phone in front of me. I'm not allowed to check email, social media, no way. Like, it's just not allowed to happen during those work periods. When my timer goes off and now I have a 15 or a 5-minute break, my rule about that free time is I can do whatever I want. I cannot do work. So in other words, I actually have to step away. I force myself to step away, but I can do anything I want under the sun as long as it's not work. And what that has really allowed for me to do is to free up a lot of that sort of like ambiguity, meaning like unclear thoughts in my head about what am I doing? Am I doing enough? Am I getting enough done? I know that when I sit down to work, I'm being efficient and I'm spending the time that I need to spend. Now, another thing that I do is if I'm studying or if I'm in a position where I need to get in so much time per day, I basically decide that there's a certain threshold I can hit on a certain day or every day of the week or a total per week, that once I hit that threshold, I can choose to go and do whatever I want. So if I want to go hang out with friends for the rest of the day, I can do that with no guilt whatsoever. What happens for most people, and I did this as well, is I assumed that every waking hour, any free time in my day had to be used to study, to learn to code, to think about code. But the truth is that I tried that for a long time. I tried that for a few weeks and I became just sort of drained all the time because your brain, again, is more like a muscle. It needs time to relax so that it can power through and really go hard in small, brief periods. So it's just critical that you clarify these things to yourself and that when you sit down to work, that you have the discipline to make sure that you're not allowing distractions. And when you're taking time off, that you have the discipline to not let yourself to get sucked back into work. Because the worst thing you can do is not actually take breaks, right? Like when your timer goes off to stop working, you just sit there and keep working. And all of a sudden you're 3 hours in, you start getting frustrated because you haven't had that time off. So this idea of boundaries is a simple one, meaning simple to understand, but it's actually harder than you think to implement if you're not doing it. So I hope this video has been helpful, but please make sure to take some time and really think about what this means and to develop your own system, of course, for boundaries and what that means and what those rules are. And then more than anything else, apply discipline and time to try to work that in, because I guarantee you it will give you results over time. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. By the way, if you want to get more content from me, I have a free Facebook group that I started. I will link to it in the description below if you want to join. In that group, I try to provide more content. I try to keep the spammers out as much as possible, but that's really all I have for today. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and as always, peace out.